Part 47. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 461. Rongyu was not a person who was afraid of the cold, but every time he came in from the outside, he would stand by the stove for a while. When the coldness on his body subsided, he would walk to Nan 11. Is the fight over? Nan 11 raised her eyes, changed into a loose and soft robe after washing, leaned on the brocade couch, and looked at him with a smile. Did Zanruo cry when he lost? He can't do such a shameful thing. Rongyu walked up to her and reached out to take the hot tea handed over by Nan 11. Are you sleepy? Nan 11 shook her head. It's okay. Rongyu took a sip of tea and frowned slightly. He is the only person who annoys me to death, but I can't kill him. Nan 11 laughed. I can tell. This further illustrates the deep affection that the second prince had for Dan Shu in his previous life. Coupled with the assignment on his deathbed, the second prince had no choice but to take up the important task of dongling Shirji. Rongyu only cares about these 2 points and will tolerate him no matter what. Sleep. Rongyu put down the teacup, picked her up and walked towards the inner hall. Duanwu will leave early tomorrow morning, and Suchang will probably also ask to leave. Nan 11 said, leave early and save your worries. I don't want to see these annoying people again. Don't worry. Rongyu put her on the bed, lowered his head and kissed her cheek. They won't have another chance to disturb us for at least 10 years. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows and smiled. If you don't want to annex them, why not just create civil strife in each country and let them fight among themselves? In this way, let's see if they still have the energy to form alliances and marriages and become masters of the world. Obviously you don't have that much ability, but if you insist on thinking about such big things, the result of overestimating your own capabilities will only be nothing. Rongyu hummed, I don't have time to take care of them, let our son take care of them. Nan 11 was lying on the bed, her eyes shining brightly, and the smile on her lips was a bit playful. What if our son is like you? Rongyu thought for a while and said calmly, so we must first warn him to stay away from the temptation of beauties. Nan 11 smiled and said, it's hard to talk about emotional matters. The more restraint you have, the easier it may be to get out of hand. Then buy him a house with 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. It won't be surprising if he sees so many beauties. Rongyu widened his robe and lay down next to her. His voice became calmer unconsciously. You don't have it, he can have it all. Nan 11 almost laughed to death from him. Rongyu, the person we are discussing now is your son, not someone else. Rongyu said, that's him I'm talking about. Nan 11 was silent for a moment and looked at him with raised eyebrows. So, the reason why you are devoted to me is actually because you have seen too few beauties since you were a child. Yes. Rongyu actually nodded. You are the only real beauty I have ever seen. Nan 11 was speechless, but her red lips could not help but curl up. Rongyu, if anyone accuses you of being taciturn in the future, I will definitely refute him. Rongyu smiled lightly and said nothing. Zanruo also had such a temperament in his previous life. Although I was annoying before, I didn't have such a childish and venomous tongue. Rongyu said, silent for a moment. 11er. Are you curious about the past life? Do you have any idea of clarifying it? We are living a good life now. Nan 11 smiled lightly. If the buried memory is mostly accompanied by pain and regret, then even thinking about it will only add to the sadness. What other role can it play? Do I cherish the hard-won relationship between us more? But even if I don't have that memory, I will still cherish it? Rongyu said nothing. Time can bury many things. Nan 11 said softly, you can also forget. There is no need to torture yourself with those past memories. After a pause, the only ones who can participate in our relationship are you and me. No one else has the right to dictate our feelings. Rongyu stretched out his hand to wrap her in his arms and hummed softly, you're right. Everything in the past has long gone with the wind, and now they have just started a new life. Every day from now on should be peaceful, calm, fulfilling and happy. There is no need to dwell on the past, let alone be trapped by the mistakes of the previous life. What is lost cannot be recovered. We can only grasp this life and have a clear conscience. Early the next morning, in order to let Nan 11 sleep a little longer, Rong Yu got up and went to the morning court alone, ordering Yin Yu and Yin Shuang to guard her and not allow anyone to disturb her. However, just half an hour after he left, Jean Ruo's furious voice came from outside, "I want to see Her Majesty the Queen. Get out of my way." Nan 11, who was lying comfortably on the bed, was woken up by him. She opened her eyes and said in a lazy voice, "Am I too lazy these past 2 days? I haven't even thought about it until now." Yunyu smiled and said, "Master is pregnant, so he should eat well and sleep well." Rong Yu went to court. "Yes," Yunyu said, "the prince specifically asked you to sleep a little longer." Yunyu Nan 11 sighed while lying on the quilt, "I must have done too many good deeds in my previous life, so I met Rong Yu in this life." Yunyu laughed, "How could there be so many previous lives?" She said sincerely, "My master has been a kind-hearted person in this life, and he can bear the deep affection of the prince." Nan 11 smiled and sat up from the bed. "Is Jean Ruo making a noise outside?" "Yes." Yin Yu nodded and took Nan 11's clothes over. "Yin Shuang has already gone out to stop him. It's just because the prince has told him that the imperial army is quite polite to him and no one makes things difficult for him." Nan 11 got up and dressed, and Yin Yu signaled the palace servants waiting outside the hall to come in and serve. Half an hour later, Jean Ruo was allowed to enter the hall. Seeing Nan 11 sitting on the couch after washing and dressing, his blue face from the cold eased a little, and his expression was a little embarrassed. "I sit down." Nan 11 looked calm, with a faint smile on her face, as if what happened yesterday had not happened. "You haven't had breakfast yet." Jean Ruo cursed himself for being useless. As expected, the elder sister is always the elder sister, always so calm and unperturbed. In comparison, his repeated words and deeds yesterday were really as childish and ridiculous as a child. The moment before, he said he was leaving with the righteousness, and today he came up again, which was really embarrassing. Jean Ruo walked over hesitantly and sat down opposite her. "I just want to ask your majesty, if the regent goes to the morning court alone, aren't you worried that he will monopolize power and undermine your power?" In fact, he originally wanted to ask, "Why can Rong Yu leave the empress alone to go to the morning court?" However, the tone of questioning in front of Nan 11 couldn't help but be restrained and turned into an inquiry. "What is there to worry about?" Nan 11 smiled lightly, "Why do I need such great power? Besides, Rong Yu just sympathizes with me and doesn't want me to work too hard. Men always have their own reasons when they say sweet words." Nan 11 laughed, "Rong Yu didn't hurt you last night." Jean Ruo's face flushed instantly when he heard it. "It's not that I can't beat him, I just let him." Nan 11 nodded, with an expression that he understood his intentions. "It's not good to fight and kill at every turn. It's not gentlemanly. Besides, you are so beautiful, you must be gentle, so that more girls will like you in the future. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered." Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 462. When Zanruo heard this, his heart suddenly felt sour, and his eyes almost turned red. "My sister always talked to him like this before, but instead of asking him to be gentle, she always taught him some principles of life, telling him that a man should have the world in mind, be calm and generous, be tolerant to others, and have a good temperament. Peace, I actually still remember many things from my previous life clearly." Although Nan 11 at this time has no memories of her previous life, her tone of voice is so similar to that of Dan Shu in her previous life. Sure enough, people who are naturally gentle will still retain their kind and tolerant nature no matter how many times they are reincarnated. Jean Ruo suppressed the turbulent emotions in his heart and whispered, "The regent didn't say bad things about me in front of His Majesty." What are you saying bad things about? Nan 11 laughed. Rong Yu is the regent of Dongling and is busy with government affairs. Where does he find the time to say bad things about you? Besides, he is not a third aunt or sixth grandmother. Jean Ruo secretly thought that he knew the truth. But Rong Yu said that you and Dan Shu have a great relationship. Nan 11 smiled lightly, so even though I don't remember you, he is still willing to tolerate you for my sake. Zanruo muttered in a low voice, who wants him to be patient? Nan 11 pretended not to hear and said with a faint smile, I also hope you can look out for my sake and live in peace with him. Zanruo was silent for a moment. If he had ever done something that was sorry to his majesty, would your majesty forgive him? I said, the past is in the past. Nan 11 said, I don't have that much energy to pursue the past. I hope you can let go of the past. Zanruo was about to speak, but suddenly thought of something. He hurriedly turned to look inside the palace, only to find that all the palace residents had left the palace at some point. Now only the two of them are left. No wonder she could mention Dan Shu without worrying about being suspected. Jean Ruo breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time he remembered another serious problem, so he raised his eyes to look at Nan 11, frowned and said, Your Majesty, this is not appropriate. Huh? Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. What's inappropriate? A man and a woman are alone in the same room. Jean Ruo said, I will not harm your Majesty, but that does not mean that others will not do the same. What if the person sitting here today is another man? No other man would be treated like this. Nan 11 smiled softly, apart from Rong Yu, you are the second man who can be alone with me. Even Rong Yu had to tolerate him, which proved that he was worthy of trust. Zanruo fell silent for a moment, his eyes tangled. Your Majesty, are you trying to win over me? Nan 11 couldn't help but laugh again. Why should I win over you? In order for me and the regent to live in peace. Whether you can live in peace or not doesn't have a big impact on me. Nan 11 told the truth. Since the past has passed, I don't want to pursue the past anymore, so no matter what the relationship between us was, in the end it's all happened in the past life, there's no need to talk about it in this life. But she and Rong Yu were a real couple in this life. So there is no comparison between Jean Ruo and Rong Yu. Nan 11 didn't speak too directly, but Jean Ruo didn't understand what she meant. So if he continues to have a stalemate with Rong Yu, Nan 11 will still choose to protect Rong Yu. If he really angers her, he will really have no room for regret. At the moment, Rong Yu has not yet reached the limit of his patience, and Nan 11 is good-tempered and can pretend that nothing happened, saving him enough face. It would be smart for him to just give up when he gets the chance. Although Jean Ruo was not very happy, he could only follow her. After all, in the previous life when Dan Shu had her memories, he was no match for Rong Huijin, not to mention that Rong Yu had the absolute advantage in this situation now. Actually, I came here this time to create an opportunity for Dongling to complete the great cause of unification. Jean Ruo said, Rong Yu has powerful soldiers and horses, inexhaustible wealth, and many generals in his hands. As long as your Majesty has this intention, Rong Yu will definitely be able to unify the 9 provinces. At that time, your Majesty will be the true Lord of the world, an emperor for the ages, and his name will be left in the history books. With Rong Yu's feelings for your Majesty, he is not worried that he will seek power and usurp the throne. That's why I released that prophecy. Having said this, a hint of apology appeared on his face. If this offends your Majesty, please forgive me. It doesn't matter. Nan 11 shook her head nonchalantly, but I'm not interested in becoming the master of the world, and Rong Yu isn't that ambitious, so it's a waste of your efforts. Jean Ruo sneered coldly. I don't know what he was thinking if he left such a good opportunity unused. If we don't have this ambition, we can't force it. Nan 11 smiled. Besides, Dongling has always advocated peace, and the purpose of letting the queen ascend is to curb war. If I conquer the world as soon as I ascend the throne, where will the priest's palace be placed? Jean Ruodeo, if each country sends troops first, Dongling will just take advantage of the situation and counterattack. It does not violate the rules. Nan 11 said, I prefer a stable life. As soon as these words came out, Jean Rouault was speechless. That's true. My sister has always loved peace in her past and present lives, and does not want the common people to suffer from war. Those so-called ambitions are simply disasters imposed on the people by kings of various countries in order to satisfy their own selfish desires. Fame and fortune are fleeting, and one should still pursue comfort and ease in life. With a clear conscience. I heard that you calculated the fortunes of 3 people just one day after you arrived. Nan 11 changed the subject and looked at him with a subtle look. Is Suchang really going to die? Jean Rouault was not surprised that the news reached her and nodded. Life is not long. Where is Xiejin? Nan 11 frowned. You said he will be alone and die alone. Jean Rouault curled his lips. Anyway, he is born with bad luck and is destined to be childless. You are so careless about leaking the secrets, aren't you worried about backlash? Nan 11 frowned. Don't people often say secrets of heaven cannot be leaked? He leaked 3 secrets in one day, simply treating the way of heaven as nothing. No matter if there is backlash or not, the most important thing is to live happily. Jean Rouault looked at it very openly, with a completely indifferent tone. Living to 20 and living to 80 are no different to me. Nan 11 was silent for a moment, but still couldn't help but persuade, it's better to change your outspokenness in the future. Your Majesty, don't worry, I know what's going on. Jean Rouault smiled faintly. Yesterday was because I was very angry and in a bad mood. Normally, people would kneel down and beg me to tell their fortunes, but it depends on my mood. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 463. Nan 11 hummed, that's good. Jean Rouault was silent for a moment and whispered, I want to have dinner with your Majesty. Okay. Nan 11 smiled lightly and called Yin Yu in, go and prepare breakfast. Yes. It's time for Rong Yu to come back. Nan 11 said, we just happen to be together. Jean Rouault frowned, I don't want to see him. I'm afraid that won't work. Nan 11 chuckled, as long as you stay in this palace, you can't avoid seeing him. Jean Rouault pouted, can't we send him out for a few days? Nan 11 held her chin, her voice gentle and smiling, I can't bear to let him go. Jean Rouault was silent, speechless for a moment. Aja seems to be able to express her feelings more directly than in her previous life. Well, she has indeed learned from that guy Rong Yu and is not reserved at all. Jean Rouault. Nan 11 frowned, can Xiejin's fate be changed? The legitimate son of Xie Xiaofu, noble and handsome, but childless in his life. Jean Rouault said, I haven't calculated it carefully. If your Majesty cares about his fate, let me rest for a few days to recuperate my energy, and then I can do a good calculation for him. Nan 11 hummed, just do your best, don't worry too much. Jean Rouault nodded. When Yunyu led the palace servants to prepare breakfast, Rong Yu happened to come back from the court, followed by Xianyuan Hua and Xianyuan Chen. After entering the palace, the 2 of them saluted Nan 11. Nan 11 took a closer look and found that she had not seen these 2 young men for several days since they came to work with Rong Yu as his attendants, because they were arranged by Rong Yu to work in the study most of the time and would not follow him anytime and anywhere. Beside, today, the 2 of them were wearing the same dark blue robes, which made their handsome features look a little more calm and reserved, and they looked obviously different from before. No gifts. Nan 11 smiled lightly, breakfast is ready. You 2 can stay and eat it together. Thank you, Your Majesty. Xianyuan Chen said respectfully, I just have to go back to my hometown today. I hope Your Majesty will forgive me. Xianyuan Hua said, I will go with him to Prince Wei's mansion to visit Aunt Jiao. Nan 11 understood and turned around to tell Nanny Su, Go and pick out some supplements suitable for women and ask them to take them back to replenish concubine Jiao's health. Yes. The two teenagers thanked them and quickly left. Nan 11 walked over and looked at Rong Yu's expression up and down. I'm going to discuss things this morning. No one is messing with you. Yes, Rong Yu put his arm around her shoulders and complained as if no one else was watching. Those righteous men who are afraid of the world being in chaos are clamoring for you to take concubines, and they want to put their sons into the harem right away. I let you people look for a few reliable matchmakers to see who still needs a match, and match them all, so that they don't have to worry about things they shouldn't. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. You didn't lose your temper. No, Rong Yu acted obediently. Little fish and shrimp are not worth getting angry at. After the words fell, a sneer came from not far away. He is obviously a ruthless jackal, but he has to wear sheep's clothing and pretend to be a docile little sheep, so he is not embarrassed. Rong Yu turned his head and said in a calm voice, "Why are you still here?" "I like it," Jean Ruo snorted. "I can stay wherever I like." "Do you care?" Rong Yu looked away and was too lazy to pay attention to him. The palace attendants brought him warm water to clean his hands. Nan 11 took the handkerchief and wiped his hands dry, as virtuous as a good wife and mother at home. Jean Ruo sat aside and looked at it with sore eyes. He couldn't help but get up and said, "Forget it, I'd better go out and find something to eat by myself." Nan 11 smiled and said, "What's wrong?" "I have a bad stomach and am afraid of acidity," Jean Ruo said and walked out. "I will walk around the imperial city these 2 days and go to the priest's hall to talk to the high priest. Your Majesty doesn't need to pay attention to me." Nan 11 watched him leave and frowned. Feng Huo is indeed a child. "Ignore him." Rong Yu held her in his arms and sat together at the dining table. "Su Shang also asked to say goodbye this morning. I agreed and asked someone to send him and Duan Wu out of the city." Jean Ruo said that Su Chang's life will not last long. Nan 11 said in a calm tone, "Is it because of the news that was passed to me before? If the Emperor of South Vietnam knew that Su Chang was actually his father's illegitimate son, no matter whether the news was true or false, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to tolerate Su Chang." "Yes," Rong Yu nodded. "Once the king's suspicion arises, Su Chang's death will indeed be imminent." Nan 11 smiled lightly and said nothing more. "How about Xian Yuan Chen and Xian Yuan Hua?" Rong Yu likes this kind of atmosphere of chatting while eating, especially when it's just the two of them and there are no other people to disturb them. "Not bad," he replied while serving her dishes. "Both of them have no problem with their knowledge. They are used to being cautious and not very courageous. They have their own opinions but dare not say anything. They are afraid of you, and they are even more afraid of making too many mistakes and getting into trouble," Nan 11 said, "but it is normal. Accompanying the emperor is like accompanying a tiger. Since ancient times, it has been difficult to do errands around the emperor, not to mention that their status is more special than ordinary ones. The young master is a bit shorter, so it's normal to be cautious and speak less." Rong Yu wanted to say that he was not an emperor, let alone a tiger. But what Nan 11 said makes sense. It doesn't matter whether he is the emperor or not, the most important thing is that he holds the power of life and death in his hands, which makes people have to be afraid. The identities of Xian Yuan Chen and Xian Yuan Hua have indeed made them accustomed to being cautious in their words and deeds. Naturally, they have to be even more careful when entering the palace. Rong Yu didn't dwell on these trivial matters and concentrated on feeding his wife. "It's sunny outside today," he said. "You can go out for a walk at noon." Nan 11 smiled calmly. "I've gotten used to staying in the palace these 2 days, and I feel a lot lazier." "It will be fine after the baby is born," Rong Yu said, his voice lowered. "Thank you for your hard work." Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. "Why is it hard? The baby in your belly is not yours alone, and you still have to call me mother." Rong Yu's eyebrows softened unconsciously when he heard this. "Well, this is their common blood heritage and the proof of their love in this life. Although it will inevitably take up too much of her time and energy in the future, thinking of the responsibilities she will inherit after he is born, Rong Yu feels that everything is tolerable. The days after the first month of the year are getting warmer day by day, and Nan 11's belly is getting bigger. As the due date is approaching, Rong Yu has arranged 8 experienced midwives, 4 female doctors with superb medical skills, 4 young wet nurses and experienced and reliable maids in the palace to be on call around the clock. As the weather warmed up, Nan 11 occasionally went to the morning court, but most of the time Rong Yu was in charge of all government affairs. The court officials knew that the empress was about to give birth, so they did not raise any objections to this matter. In order to make the regent feel good, they even stopped mentioning the matter of choosing a husband. Everything went smoothly, like spring, with clear water and peaceful seas. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 464. The weather is getting warmer, and people's hearts are getting restless. The status of the big Buddha in the palace is too noble, and its strength is too strong. It temporarily suppressed the thoughts of the court officials, but the thoughts of the ladies of the imperial capital's noble families could not be suppressed. The eldest princess was busy from the new year to the new year. Almost every day, noble ladies came to disturb her, either drinking tea or chatting. Of course, this chat was not ordinary. After the new year, Princess Jing also became busy. Chu Hong'ai stayed in the palace to take care of her pregnancy. She didn't show up many times during the new year. Xian Yuanqi also stayed in the palace to accompany his newlywed wife, so he didn't know that people outside had already become restless. There is a habit of going around to pay New Year's greetings for a few days on the first day of the first lunar month. During this period, many ladies secretly stared at the position of the concubine of the Prince of Jing's mansion. It's not that these ladies of noble families are eager to make their daughters concubines, but the Jing's mansion is now the most popular mansion in front of the empress, and being a concubine to Prince Ji is better than being the wife of an ordinary family. Moreover, most of those who have such thoughts are from families much lower than the Prince Jing's, or from families of equal status who want to marry a concubine's daughter in order to establish a nepotism relationship with the Prince Jing. After all, for many officials, the value of a daughter's existence is to pave the way for their fathers' and brothers' careers through marriage, and this is even more true for concubines' daughters. Therefore, Princess Jing has not been able to have a quiet time for more than half a month. There are always people encouraging her, now that the crown prince's wife is pregnant and has many physical discomforts, shouldn't we take a concubine to take care of the crown prince's daily life? My daughter Fu has been kind since she was a child, knows how to be considerate and take care of others, and is also born with a good appearance. If she can come to the mansion, she will definitely be obedient and serve the crown prince and the crown prince's wife well, and will never do anything beyond her status. The princess should indeed consider taking a concubine for the crown prince. First, General Chu is pregnant and it is inconvenient for him to serve the crown prince. Second, General Chu is a military general. Even if the child is born in the future, he will definitely not be able to serve him like an ordinary wife. My husband, the prince, is still a little lonely without someone who knows how to serve him. What do you think, princess? My daughter Jiao Jiao is well educated, thoughtful, and gentle. After she gets married, she will serve the prince and his wife attentively and will never think of competing for favor. I just hope that the princess can consider it. The above are all suggestions made by the mistress of the house while drinking tea and chatting. Of course, there are some implicit ones that she is embarrassed to speak up, so she will ask reliable people to speak well of her daughter in front of Princess Jing, and only praise her daughter for being proficient in piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting, and being so beautiful that fish sink to the bottom of the water and geese fall to the ground, and the moon hides the flowers, but without exception, they are all gentle and considerate, non-competitive, humble and gentle little girls. The meaning is very simple, that is, after entering the palace, she must be absolutely law-abiding, virtuous, respectful to the prince and the princess, and obedient in front of the prince and the prince's wife, and will never do anything to compete for favors and annoy the princess. Princess Jing just laughed it off at first, but after hearing it many times, she got annoyed. Although after the empress ascended the throne, many daughters of marriageable age in the imperial families were eager to arrange marriages, but there were also many men of marriageable age in the families. Why were they all staring at the Prince Jing's mansion? She had finally eased the relationship with her son, so couldn't she be left alone for a while? After thinking it over, Princess Jing told Xian Yuanqi about it and was determined that she had no intention of giving him a concubine. First, to avoid misunderstandings from her son, and second, to see what Xian Yuanqi thought about it. Xian Yuanqi didn't react after hearing this. He only told Chu Hong'ai about this matter before going to bed at night. Chu Hong'ai said, "I'll take care of this matter." Xian Yuanqi was surprised, and then asked curiously, "How do you want to deal with it?" Chu Hong'ai said, "The weather has been good these 2 days, and the flower tea party can be held." Xian Yuanqi smiled lightly, "You want to hold a flower tea party in the palace?" Chu Hong'ai nodded and stroked her abdomen gently. "The child is more than 3 months old. It shouldn't have any effect if we use force appropriately." Xian Yuanqi, who knows his wife better than her husband, understood her meaning almost instantly, and unconditionally supported any decision of his wife. The next day, he told the matter to Princess Jing. Although Princess Jing didn't know what her wife was up to, she followed Xian Yuanqi's words and sent invitations to all the girls from noble families who wanted to be Xian Yuanqi's concubines, inviting them to come to the flower tea party in Prince Jing's palace 2 days later. The ladies who received the invitation were secretly delighted, thinking that the matter could be accomplished. They repeatedly told them to behave well in front of Princess Jing and Prince Ji, especially not to conflict with the prince's wife, and to be as humble as possible and be as respectful as possible. 2 days later, elegant and exquisite carriages drove to the gate of Prince Jing's mansion. Various petite, gentle, and pretty, bright-looking legitimate or concubine daughters of noble families got off the carriages, wearing various elegant or brightly colored clothes. When their eyes met, sparks flew secretly. The atmosphere was comparable to the emperor's selection of talents, with swords drawn and secret competition. However, this atmosphere could not last long. After entering the palace, the girls were led to the garden where tea and snacks were prepared early. After they sat down one after another, they heard the servants in the palace shouting, "The crown prince's consort has arrived." The girls in the garden stood up to greet her and quietly looked up at Chu Hong'ai, wondering what the scene was today and what attitude General Chu had towards her husband marrying a concubine. They originally thought that the tea party was organized by Princess Jing, but they didn't expect that the person who came would be Chu Hong'ai. And Chu Hong'ai came alone. Men and women are not allowed to touch each other, so Xian Yuanqi was not convenient to meet these girls who were waiting to be married, so he arranged 2 maids who knew martial arts to follow her from a distance. As soon as she stepped into the garden, Chu Hong'ai casually glanced at the girls in front of her, some of whom she had seen before and some of whom she had not seen before. She was not interested in getting to know them one by one, so she went straight to the point and said, "I am fully responsible for Prince Ji's concubines. This general is pregnant, and it is indeed inconvenient recently, so I want to give Prince Ji 2 concubines." Without waiting for the girls to speak, he slowly untied a long black whip from his waist and quietly placed it on the table. "This is the precious whip awarded by Her Majesty the Queen." After the voice fell, the faces of the girls changed, and they all knelt down. "This general doesn't like delicate little flowers, they can't stand being beaten," Chu Hong'ai said indifferently, whoever can be whipped more than 50 times by this general today will be immediately arranged to enter the palace and live in Prince Ji's courtyard tonight. The women were shocked and their faces turned pale. 50. They looked up at the whip on the long table and thought to themselves that with the strength of Chu Hong-ai, 20 whips would be enough to send them to hell. How could they survive after 50 whips? The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 465. Princess Jing, who was standing in the attic not far away and observing the overall situation, had a complex and subtle expression for a while. She obviously did not expect that Chu Hong-ai would use this method to scare away the girls. Easy and neat, nipping everyone's thoughts in the bud, Xian Yuanqi opened his mouth, looking at the kind face of his beloved wife in the garden, and he couldn't hide the smile on his lips. In addition to my wife, there are also who can be so brave and brave. Princess Jing turned to look at him and was speechless at the obvious awkwardness in his words. She was silent for a moment and said calmly, "Do you really like a girl like Chu Hong-ai?" Xian Yuanqi nodded, "No one can make my heart beat except her." "Do you like her toughness?" "I like her uniqueness." Xian Yuanqi looked at the trembling girls in the garden, and his eyes quickly returned to Chu Hong-ai's face. "Mother doesn't think that most of these girls in the garden are carved from the same mold." Princess Jing said, "This world has strict requirements for women. There are countless rules that restrict them. They can't help themselves. Besides, whether they are legitimate daughters or concubines, they all come from aristocratic families and have the upbringing and rules of a famous family. There is no room for provocation." "Well, it's true." Xian Yuanqi nodded, "but human nature is difficult to change. These little flowers that came today seem to be weak and harmless, dignified and virtuous. Will they become the second one in the future? Fang Lanyi, can mother see it now?" When Fang Lanyi was mentioned, Princess Jing had an unpleasant expression. "Don't mention her again." Xian Yuanqi smiled faintly. In contrast, Hongyi never minds letting anyone see her true nature, and she will not suppress her nature for anyone. Princess Jing agreed with this. Chu Hong-ai does have a true temperament. Although she will be a little restrained in front of her elders, she does not deliberately pretend to be gentle and virtuous. That is not hers. It's just that he has a straightforward temperament and a simple mind, which makes it actually easier to get along with him. However, many men nowadays don't like this kind of girl. Because most men feel that they are uncontrollable and lose face. They want their wives to be gentle and submissive, preferably the kind who won't fight back or scold them. Xian Yuanqi mocked, "So they only deserve better than those little delicate flowers that look weak and harmless." Princess Jing was silent for a moment. "Is Hongyi's temperament just right for you?" "Well, we are a perfect match." Xian Yuanqi did not hesitate to express his feelings. "I exist to accept and tolerate her. She is destined to be my wife from birth." Princess Jing. This was the first time she had seen such a narcissistic son. So, in the future, anyone with such small thoughts will be dealt with by Hong-ai. Xian Yuanqi stroked his chin. "I just like to see my wife show off her power." Princess Jing's mouth twitched. She really couldn't stand his bad taste. She said calmly, "So you really have no intention of taking a concubine?" "Not at all." Xian Yuan prayed, "Having a Chu Hong-ai in this life is enough for me." Princess Jing hummed and had no special reaction. "Just decide." Xian Yuanqi stared out the window. Many women in the garden looked at the whip uneasily, and one of them questioned, "General Chu is not the master of Prince Jing's palace now, so why don't you let Prince Ji take a concubine?" Chu Hong-ai glanced at her coldly. "Just because this whip is a gift from the emperor, it is not illegal to kill people." The expression of the choked girl changed instantly. "If you want to be Prince Ji's pillow, I have no objection." Chu Hong-ai's voice was indifferent. "As long as you can survive 50 years under this whip, I, the general, believe that your affection for Prince Ji will be the best in the world. Biao, I will arrange for you to enter the house tonight without any hesitation." During the dinner, A woman in a goose yellow dress frowned slightly and said softly, "The general is pregnant, so he should be blessed for the child." "So, this general will give you some peace of mind," Chu Hong I said calmly, "I won't kill you." The faces of the girls changed, and finally no one dared to speak anymore. Who would be willing to be whipped for being a concubine to Prince Ji? Not to mention that Chu Hong I was a martial arts practitioner. Would she deliberately beat them to death, even if she could still breathe and be covered with bruises, but still want to win the favor of her husband? Even thinking about it, I knew it was impossible. If the whip falls on the face, the delicate appearance will be ruined, and it will be too late to regret. The most important thing is that Chu Hong I uses a long whip given by the emperor. Even if he accuses the queen, he will not be punished. When the time comes, he will have to consider himself unlucky if he is beaten to death or maimed. When all the girls thought about it, they immediately had the urge to run away. Prince Jing's palace has a prominent family, so being a concubine is better than a legitimate wife in an ordinary family. Prince Ji is as beautiful as a flower. Do you feel happy just looking at his face every day? No, these are secondary to my own life. Even if they were able to marry into Prince Jing's mansion as they wished today, when they thought about having to face whips from Chu Hong I from time to time in the future, they felt that Prince Jing's mansion was like a dragon's den and a tiger's den, and they couldn't get in. It was more reliable to marry a legitimate wife from an ordinary family. At least they wouldn't have to be whipped. Well, a girl at the table stood up and said calmly, "I just went out today to get some fresh air. Since General Chu intends to take a concubine for Prince Ji, then I won't disturb you all. I have other things to do. Take the first step, you can do it yourself." After saying that, he quickly turned around and left with the maid. "I also have something to do. Hey, Fuer, wait for me. It's a nice day today. I want to go to the market." "Xiao Xiao, are you going?" "Okay, let's go together." The two girls found a logical excuse to say goodbye and leave. The others didn't even bother to find an excuse and just followed the crowd out. In the huge garden, only Chu Hong I and the two maids behind her were left. Faced with this unprecedented scene, Princess Jing didn't know how to react for a moment, and only said, "After today, these girls should stop thinking." She had never seen such a trick to deal with a love rival, and today was an eye-opener. Xian Yuanqi sighed, turned, and walked out of the attic, and walked into the garden. "My wife is really powerful. She won a great victory in less than a cup of tea." Princess Jing glanced at his leisurely back, shook her head, and turned to leave. So far, the turmoil of Prince Jing's concubine was completely resolved. After the girls who entered the mansion today left, they described Chu Hong I as a ferocious monster, and told other people who didn't know the truth in no uncertain terms that Chu Hong I was now the boss of Prince Jing's mansion, and anyone who wanted to be a concubine to Prince Ji had to first pass the imperial whip in Chu Hong I's hand. Chu Hong I was an extremely cruel person, and one whip could make a person's brain burst. This spread from one person to 10, and from 10 to 100, until Chu Hong I became a tigress that everyone avoided, and no one dared to make a move on Prince Ji. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbspeed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 466. When news of what happened in Prince Jing's mansion reached the palace, Nan 11, who was sitting in the palace garden basking in the sun, raised her lips in interest after hearing this. General Chu is indeed a different woman. The silver moon is by your side, and the early spring sunshine is warm and soft, falling on your face with a warm and comfortable feeling. However, the weather suddenly turned warm and cold, so you still had to pay attention to catching cold, so Yunya carried a thick cloak with her and covered Nan 11's body, covering her high bulge in the abdomen. Yes, there are rumors all over the city that Prince Ji married a tigress, Yunya said with a smile, but this General Chu is really powerful. Instead of arguing with them, he directly used the whip given by the emperor to scare them. Those little girls were so beautiful that they almost fled from Prince Jing's mansion. Nan 11 imagined that scene and couldn't help but smile. Well, it's really good. There are also some little girls who began to sympathize with Prince Ji privately, saying that Prince Ji is weak and must often be whipped by General Chu on weekdays. Maybe he is often ravaged. He is so pitiful. Yunya said more and more. Subordinate hearing this made me laugh so hard. Chi Shiza was ravaged and often whipped? Nan 11 couldn't help but laugh and said, General Chu is afraid that he will be reluctant to use the whip on Prince Chi. Yes, General Chu has a cold face and a warm heart. How can he be willing to whip his sweetheart? Yunya smiled, brought 2 plates of fruit over and placed them on the rosewood table aside. Master, would you like some fruit? I don't want to eat. I've been getting more and more sleepy these past 2 days. Nan 11 raised her hand to cover her eyes, her voice sounded a little lazy and sleepy. I always feel like I didn't get enough sleep. Master is getting heavier, and fatigue and drowsiness should be a normal reaction, Yunya said, but it should be better after the little master is born. Nan 11 hummed, closed her eyes slightly, and stroked her abdomen. I don't know who the baby looks like more. It would be great if I could have a little guy who looks like Rong Yu. Yunya chuckled, maybe the prince hopes to have a little master who looks like you. Nan 11 smiled and said nothing. As the birth was imminent, Mrs. Wen suggested that she go out and walk around more. The weather was getting warmer and the sun was just right, so it was a good time to go out and breathe fresh air. But Nan 11 couldn't get enough energy. She didn't want to move after lying down. She seemed a little more lazy than in the early stages of pregnancy. As soon as she sat on the recliner, she fell asleep without realizing it. Sometimes when she wakes up, she is already lying on the dragon bed in the dormitory, or when she opens her eyes, she can see Rong Yu sitting aside and looking at her, his eyes so soft that you can't help but drown in them. She always smiled involuntarily in response to this, feeling that such ears were so beautiful that it felt unreal. The number of drowsiness increased, and Nan 11 inevitably felt that something was abnormal, so she summoned the imperial physician to check her pulse. However, the imperial physician checked several times and said that both mother and child were fine, that the pulse was not abnormal, and that drowsiness was a normal condition. Fortunately, Qingling also explained that women do experience drowsiness during pregnancy because the fetus gradually grows in the mother's body and the mother's body feels tired, so she always wants to sleep. So Nan 11 didn't think much about it and attributed everything to her laziness. But when she couldn't see, Rong Yu's brows started to show worries, especially when her sleepiness became more and more obvious in the past 2 days. When she opened her eyes, she would occasionally catch a flash of uneasiness on Rong Yu's face. Today is obviously no exception. What's wrong? Nan 11 sat up, not surprised that she was lying on the bed at this time. She was leaning against the bedside. Are you done with government affairs? Rong Yu hummed, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. Are there any symptoms of discomfort? It's okay. Nan 11 thought about it for a moment. How long did I sleep? It doesn't take long, less than half an hour. The sun is so comfortable. Nan 11 smiled slightly. Do I look like some kind of animal with limbs that are not working hard now? Rong Yu shook his head and gave her a glass of water. Moisten your throat. Nan 11 took a few sips from his hand and said, why haven't you seen Jeanruo in the past 2 days? He is in the priest's hall. Rong Yu pursed his lips slightly. You want to see him? Nan 11 looked at his expression. You're not jealous, are you? Rong Yu laughed, no. That's good. Nan 11 also smiled, I heard Jean Ruo talk about Siejin before, and I wanted to ask him about the results of his divination for Siejin. Rong Yu's eyebrows moved slightly, Siejin. Nan 11 repeated Jean Ruo's words and said, the legitimate son of the Xie family should not be childless. Jean Ruo promised to help him recalculate his fortune. When Rong Yu heard this, he didn't have any special reaction. He has been in the priest's hall for the past 2 days, wondering what he was thinking about with the high priest. Rong Yu. Nan 11 raised her hand and gently stroked his forehead, don't worry, the imperial doctor said this is normal. I am a little lazy and sleep more than before. I don't have any other discomfort. You don't be too sensitive. Rong Yu grabbed her hand, put it to her lips and kissed her softly, 11er. You see, I have eaten well these past 2 days, and my face is rosy and energetic. If you are worried, I will sleep less during the day. Nan 11 teased, I am going to be a father soon, are you very nervous? As the delivery date approaches, Rong Yu is indeed worried about gains and losses. In the past, people often said that when a woman gives birth to a child, she is going through hell, and she may die at any time. Fortunately, the conditions in the palace are good, the stable woman, the medical woman, and the imperial doctor are always on hand, and all kinds of medicinal materials are also available. But even so, Rong Yu couldn't help but feel nervous. On the battlefield, facing thousands of troops and dens of dragons and tigers, he was calm and calm. However, in the past 2 days, when Nan 11 was about to give birth, he felt that he was suffering more and more day by day, and he wished he could bear the pain for her. The days passed with such worry and anxiety. Fortunately, apart from drowsiness, Nan 11 had no other symptoms, which was reassuring. Rong Yu would take the time to handle government affairs while she was asleep. When she woke up, she would always see him at her side at first sight. In the Dajhan Palace, Wenpo and the medical girl were on standby in turn at 12 o'clock every day. By the end of February, Nan 11 finally had a stomach attack. In the past 2 days, Rong Yu had been guarding her every step of the way. Hearing Nan 11 cry out that she had a stomachache, he quickly picked her up and walked into the delivery room. The ladies were in their places, busy, and the palace attendants were holding the birth. Objects came in and out, and things quickly became busy. Until an urgent shout rang out, Your Majesty is giving birth to a child, what is a man doing here? Please go out first, Prince Regent. Only then did the stable women bite the bullet and invite the regent out, who they had long wanted to drive out but had no courage to do so. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 467. The eldest princess stepped over the threshold. Her gorgeous dress made her look noble and majestic. Just treat your majesty as an ordinary woman, don't be so nervous, relax one by one, do what you should do, why are you so nervous? Rong Yu heard Nan 11's faint moan from inside, and his heart was twisted in pain. He wanted to hold her in his arms and let her bite his hand. Rong Yu. Xianyuan 11 frowned, why are you still staying here? Rong Yu restrained his expression, I'm accompanying 11. Accompany her? What else can you do here except make trouble? Xianyuan 11 frowned, why don't you give birth to her? Rong Yu was speechless. Get out. Xianyuan 11 stretched out her hand and pushed him out forcefully, wait outside. This was the first time that Rong Yu was pushed and shouted out, and watched the palace door slowly close in front of him, unable to say a word. Even the regent king can be so embarrassed. A cold snort came from behind, accompanied by Jean Ruo's mocking expression, it's really rare. Rong Yu looked at him expressionlessly, then turned his head to look at the closed palace door in front of him, and didn't want to pay attention to him at all. The scene of Nan 11 gritting her teeth and enduring the pain was still imprinted in his mind, making his usually strong heart twisted together. Your Majesty will be fine seeing him like this, Jean Ruo said lightly, I have been staying in the priest's hall these days to pray for your majesty, asking the gods to bless your majesty to give birth to a prince safely. If you are really worried, you might as well knock yourself out and sleep. Maybe when you wake up, you will hear the news that your majesty and his son are safe. Sensing that the emperor's star was about to be born in the priest's hall, he hurried to the princess's mansion and invited Rongyu's mother-in-law to come over, otherwise no one in this huge palace could control Rongyu. After hearing what Zhanruo said, Rongyu felt relieved. With the blessing of the priest's hall, 11er should be fine. Temporarily suppressing his annoyance with him, he said lightly, "Thank you." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Zhanruo sneered. "This prince prayed for my sister, do I need your thanks?" In the past, he would definitely add, "Who do you think you are?" but Nan 11 asked him to speak softly before, so he has been trying to cultivate himself these 2 days to make himself look more graceful and not so sharp-tongued. Of course, Rongyu didn't care whether his words were pleasant to the ear. Now all his thoughts were on Nan 11, and he didn't care about anything else. The door of the hall was closed and he couldn't see inside. He turned and walked to the window, and couldn't help wanting to listen to the movement inside. The palace door was suddenly opened from the inside, and Aunt Sue came out, her expression respectful and somewhat complicated. "Regent, the princess asked you to rest first, don't stand here." Rongyu frowned. "I won't go in and make trouble." "The princess asked you to do business, no need. Guarding his majesty is my business." Rongyu interrupted her expressionlessly. "How long will it take for the child to be born?" "This." Aunt Sue's face showed hesitation. "It's hard to say, some women give birth quickly, giving birth in 2 or 3 hours, some are slow, maybe it will take 2 days and 1 night. Rongyu's face changed slightly, and his thin lips pursed tightly. "Don't worry, Regent, His Majesty and the young master will be safe and sound." After Aunt Sue finished speaking, regardless of whether the regent would do business according to the princess's words, she quickly turned back to the palace and closed the door. She only dared to convey the words of Her Majesty, but did not dare to force the regent to leave. Rongyu stood outside the window, silently listening to the noise inside. The footsteps were chaotic, accompanied by the comforting and talking voices of the midwives, but Nan 11's voice was not heard. Rongyu's heart could not help but hang again. When Nan 11 cried out in pain, he felt pain too. When Nan 11 endured the pain, he felt distressed. "It's not like I haven't given birth in my previous life." Zhanruo's voice sounded low, so low that only Rongyu could hear it. "Women have to go through this stage when giving birth. If you really feel sorry for her, you shouldn't let her suffer this." Rongyu was slightly stunned. Previous life? He actually hadn't thought about his previous life for a long time. Now that he thought about it, he only remembered Dan Shu's weak and pale face after giving birth. That was the first time he saw the noble and cold queen in such a weak state. But he didn't have time to accompany her at that time, because several imperial husbands in the harem took advantage of the time when the queen was about to give birth to plot against him, and even poisoned Dan Shu to frame him. He used their tricks against them and gave them a fatal blow. That night, along with the good news that His Majesty had given birth to a prince, the 2 imperial husbands' sinister plot to poison the empress was exposed, shocking the entire court, and the 2 imperial husbands who participated in the plan were thrown into death row. The major families were shocked and angry when they heard about it, and they all clamored for him to produce evidence, otherwise it would be slander. Poisoning the empress is a serious crime that will punish 9 generations of the family. If the crime is really confirmed, the families of the 2 imperial husbands will also be annihilated, so the powerful officials of the noble families went directly to the palace to ask for an audience with His Majesty, forcing Rong Huijin to give evidence, almost forming a posture of forcing the palace. That night, the imperial guard surrounded the powerful officials of the noble families who came uninvited, and they only needed to give an order, and these ministers would be executed on the spot for the crime of treason. If it were normal times, Rong Huijin would definitely not miss such a good opportunity, but it was when Dan Shu was about to give birth, and he didn't want to stain his hands with blood, so the two sides were deadlocked. Until a baby cried, Dan Shu, who had just given birth to a prince, appeared in the brightly lit place with the careful support of the palace servants, and scanned the chaotic scene with a coercive look. "What are you doing? Are you forcing the emperor to revolt?" That was the first time Rong Huijin saw Dan Shu so weak and pale. Under the bright lights, her face was pale without a trace of blood, and her black hair was wet with sweat. Her voice was weak, but she had the ability to turn the tense scene into a farce full of gunpowder in an instant. However, if it weren't for the kindness at the beginning, there wouldn't be any later. "What is the regent thinking?" Jean Rouault's mocking voice sounded in his ears, interrupting Rong Yu, who was immersed in memories. "Are you thinking about your incompetence back then, only caring about dealing with your love rival, and finally unable to protect your own children, causing sister to clean up the mess for you again and again?" Rong Yu said indifferently, 11 is not Dan Shu of the past, and I am not Rong Huijin of the past. "You are deceiving yourself," Jean Rouault said coldly. "You are Rong Huijin, Rong Huijin is you, and denial cannot change this fact. As for your majesty, it's just that she protected you in the past, and now you protect her. What's the difference? The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered." Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 468. Rong Yu didn't say anything. What's the difference? Rong Yu knew very well that the difference was not big. Dan Shu was Nan 11, and Nan 11 was Dan Shu at the beginning. No matter how the years changed, no matter how the dynasties changed, they could not deny the facts. No one replaced anyone, because she had always been her and had never changed. But after 200 years of reincarnation, their temperaments were no longer the same as before. He was used to restraining his emotions, making himself stronger, no longer so paranoid, and thinking more carefully and calculating everything properly. He would never put her in a dilemma again, and would only protect her tightly with his strong arms. And she no longer had to bear the responsibility of the people of the world, and no longer had to worry about the positions of the major powerful ministers and families. She only needed to be a protected little woman and live a peaceful and tranquil life in the warm house he built. This was also her wish before her death. Although there had been no major changes in her identity, Rong Yu could make her live comfortably to the greatest extent. A suppressed cry of pain penetrated his eardrums, and Rong Yu's thoughts were withdrawn. His nerves suddenly tensed up, and his hands clenched tightly, almost unable to resist the urge to break into the window. "Do you need me to knock you out?" Jean Rouault frowned, staring at Rong Yu's pale face. "If the ministers see this, they might think something has happened." The regents of the Great Zhou and Dongling countries, who were famous all over the world, fought on the battlefield at the age of 14. Their almost mythical achievements frightened the generals of various countries. Even if the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked, the strong man who could remain calm, actually lost his composure like this because of a woman giving birth? Jean Rouault Rong Yu turned his head and looked at him. "Isn't it very painful for a woman to give birth?" "Ah." Jean Rouault was confused by the question. "I haven't given birth, how do I know?" Rong Yu frowned. Why didn't 11 scream? The more she tried to hold back, the more distressed she felt. If she could scream directly, maybe he would feel more at ease. "It's probably not time to shout yet," Jean Rouault guessed, frowning. "Didn't you hear what the nanny said just now? Some slow births take 1 or 2 days. If you start shouting now, how long will it take? What if you run out of energy?" When Rong Yu heard this, he thought of Nan 11's suppressed moans just now, and his heart became more and more anxious. Jean Rouault was also a little helpless when he saw him like this. Although he felt sorry for his sister, it was really a hurdle that women had to go through. You couldn't let them not give birth. "Why are you so nervous?" He couldn't help but get nervous too. This emotion lasted for nearly 2 hours, until the sun set and night fell, and a cry of pain suddenly sounded in the palace. Rong Yu's heart skipped a beat, and he didn't care about anything at the moment, and turned around to rush in through the palace door. "Regent, what are you doing?" Nanny Su was startled and pushed him out subconsciously. "You can't come in." Bang! The palace door was closed. Rong Yu is a martial artist, and this time, none of the elderly maids reacted faster than him. This was definitely the first time in his life. And Aunt Su behind the palace gate, realized it belatedly, patting her chest and sweating. She actually locked the regent outside the door. She was so bold that she was scared to death. The regent was the same. "Even if you are worried about your majesty, you can't barge in like this. Your majesty is noble, but she is a woman after all. How can a man come in when a woman is giving birth? It's simply outrageous." Yin Shuang and Qing Yang, who were on duty outside the palace gate because they couldn't help, looked at each other for a moment. They probably had never seen his prince look so out of control at this time. After hesitating again and again, Qing Yang finally leaned over and looked at Rong Yu, who was turned away. "Master, why don't we go to the imperial study to handle government affairs? If there is any news from your majesty, let Yin Shuang inform the prince later." Rong Yu didn't react, as if he didn't hear Qing Yang's words. Instead, Jean Ruo turned his head and glanced at Qing Yang. "Even if the sky falls at this moment, or someone outside leads troops to force into the palace to rebel, your prince will not leave a step." Qing Yang heard this and silently retracted his head and stood obediently. "Okay, it's better for him to keep quiet." Another half an hour passed, and with Nan 11's high-pitched scream, a relieved voice finally rang out in the hall, "It's born. The young master is born." Bang! Rong Yu kicked the door of the hall open and rushed in uncontrollably. "Wow," the sound of a baby crying followed. Jean Ruo also wanted to follow in, but as soon as he lifted his feet, he heard a cry from inside, "Regent, why are you in again? His Majesty hasn't packed up yet." There was a commotion in the hall. Then the eldest princess's steady voice rang out, "Let him in." Rong Yu entered the inner hall anxiously. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." "Congratulations, Regent. Your Majesty has successfully given birth to a prince, and both mother and child are safe." Jean Ruo suddenly thought that men and women should not touch each other. If he really dared to go into the palace at this time, Rong Yu's jealous temper and cruel methods would castrate him directly. Fortunately, His Majesty was safe and sound, and he was relieved for the time being. Thinking of this, Jean Ruo turned and walked out, and waved to Qing Yang outside the palace gate. Qing Yang frowned and looked at the prince with a bad temper. "What are you doing?" Jean Ruo said, "Accompany me for a walk." Qing Yang looked strange. "Yin Huang, you accompany him? He is the prince's personal bodyguard, how can he just listen to the orders of an outsider?" Yin Huang had no expression on his face. Yin Shuang Qing Yang tried to persuade him, "There are maids and palace maids in and out of the Dajhan Palace. They can serve His Majesty. Yin Yu is a martial arts expert and can fulfill her responsibility of protection, so it doesn't matter whether you are there or not. I am different. I am the only guard who can be ordered around the master. If I leave, the prince will not even have anyone to order around to run errands later. The queen is respected in the palace. Because of the difference between men and women, the maids and palace maids serve the master in the Dajhan Palace. And because the regent is jealous, Her Majesty does not even have a eunuch around her. Qing Yang is the only man who can enter and leave the Dajhan Palace normally besides Rong Yu, but the premise is that the regent is present. After all, wherever Rong Yu goes, he, the personal guard, follows him. When the master is with Her Majesty the Queen, he will obediently guard outside the palace. So Qing Yang always thinks he is unique. Yin Shuang is different. First, Yin Yu can do everything she can do. Second, she is silent most of the time. It is appropriate for her to accompany Jean Ruo for a walk at this time. Jeanruo's bad temper will not affect her at all. After all, no one can expect an ice cube to have emotions, right? Yinchuang may also think that what he said makes sense. She looked at Jeanruo without any emotion. Where are we going? Jeanruo frowned and looked at the two people in front of him. Don't you know the difference between men and women? Qingyang said calmly, you can treat Yinchuang as a man. Don't worry, she won't let you be responsible. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 469. The air was filled with the smell of blood, and the windows were closed tightly without ventilation, making the smell of blood even stronger. The ladies were busy with their own business, neatly cleaning the newborn baby with warm water, wrapping it in the swaddling clothes that had been prepared in advance, and holding it over to Rongyu with joyful faces. Prince Regent, this is your highness, he is a baby. Where is the prince? However, they discovered to their embarrassment that the regent had not even glanced over from the corner of his eye. He was looking at Nan 11, who had just given birth and looked pale and tired. Her expression was frighteningly white. Po Wen's expression was stern, and she turned to look at the eldest princess somewhat helplessly. Xianyuan 11 waved his hand, indicating to them what to do and not to pay attention to the abnormal regent at this time. 11er Rongyu knelt down on the bedside, held her hand, and said in a hoarse voice, how are you? I'm fine, don't worry. Although Nan 11 was exhausted, she still managed to raise her lips and smile. She stretched out her hand to caress Rongyu's bloodless face, and looked at Rongyu lovingly and complicatedly. After a while, he said softly, thank you for your hard work. It must be very uncomfortable to wait outside. When the stable ladies heard this, they couldn't help but look at each other in confusion. Hard. Your Majesty was the one who gave birth to the child, and it was your Majesty who was in pain. Why did the hard-working person become the regent? However, looking at the pale face of the regent, which seemed to be no better than his Majesty who had just given birth to a child, the stable ladies felt quite complicated. In ordinary families, men take it for granted that a woman gives birth to a child, and even think that it is not a big deal at all. Which woman does not give birth to a child? No one thinks that giving birth is hard or even dangerous. Those who dare to complain are mostly considered to be hypocritical. Women are also used to being treated in this way. They naturally feel that giving birth to children is what women should do and the only value of their existence. A woman who cannot give birth to a child or can only give birth to a daughter will be looked down upon by her husband's family, and they will live their lives looking at other people's faces all day long. They have been delivering babies for so many years. Whether it is a home for powerful officials or ordinary people, there are not many people who truly sympathize with their wives' hard work, but they are very few. However, this is the first person like the regent who is so worried and anxious that his face turns pale. But when I think about it, I think it's normal. After all, Her Majesty the Queen's identity is extraordinary. If something bad happens, the Queen is the dragon girl of heaven, a lucky person, how can anything good happen to her? After the ladies had cleaned up the little highness, they also had to wash, change and clean up Her Majesty the Queen. It was really inconvenient for the regent to stay here, so he had to ask the eldest princess for help again. Xianyuan 11 said, Rongyu, please go out first. Rongyu had just calmed down, but his pale face had not fully recovered yet. He was about to be kicked out again, and his expression suddenly changed. You go outside and wait first, Nan 11 said softly, with a somewhat soothing tone. You can come in about half an hour, wait until they finish their work. Rongyu pursed her lips, looked at her silently for a moment, and nodded slowly. Hold the child. Xianyuan 11 took the newborn child from her mother's hands and forced it into Rongyu's arms. This is your son, Don't you look at it? As soon as Rong Yu stood up, there was a newborn baby in his arms. Before he could react, he heard Xianyuan 11 say, "Go to the outer hall and wait." Rong Yu pursed her lips and glanced at Nan 11 reluctantly, receiving a weak but gentle smile from her. Rong Yu's heart palpitated, and somehow he thought of the palace change in his memory. Dan Shu, who was weak after giving birth, also smiled at him like this after rebuking the ministers who besieged the palace. The smile made him feel a dull pain in his heart and blame himself. Grandma and Wenpo are all waiting. Rong Yu had no choice but to leave the inner hall first and walk out with her newborn son in her arms. When he walked to the outer hall, he lowered his head and looked at the white and tender face of the infant child. He began to look at it unknowingly, looking at his son's eyebrows and eyes carefully. At first, he felt nothing. The more he looked at it, the more strange he felt. Who does this kid look like? The face is so small, it may not be as big as his hand. Rong Yu held the swaddling clothes in one hand and used one hand to make a gesture on the child's face. Well, it was indeed not there. It was only about half the size of his hand. The facial features are also small, the skin is a little wrinkled, a bit like a monkey, the eyes are bright, and he looks quite energetic. But to be honest, it doesn't look good. Rong Yu was murmuring in his heart, his 11er was so beautiful, why was her child so ugly? Like him. But 11er always said that he was good looking and had a rare appearance in the world. Why did his son look like this? They didn't inherit the advantages of the two at all. What's wrong? Xianyuan 11 came out and noticed that Rong Yu's expression when he looked at the child was abnormal. Is there something wrong with the child? Rong Yu raised her eyes and looked at her mother-in-law suddenly. Mother-in-law, do you think this child looks strange? He wanted to say he was ugly, but he was afraid that 11er would be sad if he heard it, so he asked more tactfully. Looks strange, Xianyuan 11 was puzzled by his question. He subconsciously lowered his head to look at the outline of the child's facial features. What's so strange? Isn't it pretty? Look at how handsome this little face is. He will definitely be a handsome man in the future. The best son. Handsome. Rong Yu was suspicious and kept staring at the child's face, but couldn't see what was so handsome about it. Newborn babies are like this. After a few days, their facial features will grow and they will look rosy and white, Xianyuan 11 said, feeding the baby some water with a small spoon. Seeing him sucking water with his little mouth, he was so cute, so he couldn't help but smile. Look how cute he is, so energetic, worthy of being a dragon's son, born to shoulder the responsibility of the people. Rong Yu finally relaxed when he heard this. He looks really energetic. It doesn't matter if he is ugly, as long as he can govern the country well. Xianyuan 11 didn't know what he was thinking. He fed the child some water. Seeing that Rong Yu's posture of holding the child was really awkward, he turned around and told the wet nurse, take the little prince over, and you can feed him when he is hungry. Yes. Rong Yu handed the child to the wet nurse, his hands empty, and couldn't help but start to worry about Nan 11 again. Fortunately, there were many people in the inner hall, so it was quick to clean up. After a cup of tea, Nanny Su came out and said, Prince Regent, His Majesty has packed everything. Rong Yu walked in before she finished speaking. The bed was already tidy and clean. Nan 11 closed her eyes slightly, her black hair spread on the pillow. The sweat on her face had been washed away, and she looked a little refreshed, but she still looked weak and tired. The bloody smell in the palace had not yet dissipated, so he could imagine the pain she had just endured. The midwives knelt down and bowed, and then filed out. Xianyuan 11 ordered Yin Yu, give them the reward silver, and take more. Yin Yu nodded in agreement. 11er Rong Yu held her hand, are you tired? Nan 11 opened her eyes and looked at him, with a smile on her lips, actually, it's okay. Rong Yu pursed his lips, it's enough to have this one child, We won't have any more in the future. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 470. But I still want a daughter. Nan 11's voice was a little hoarse, and the smile on the corners of her lips was weak but gentle. Don't you feel lonely with the child? Rong Yu looked at her, his lips tightly pursed. I haven't had time to see my son yet. Nan 11's voice was soft. Who does he look like? Rong Yu hesitated for a moment. More like me. Such an ugly son can't be said to look like 11er. Really? Nan 11's eyes fell on Rong Yu's noble and handsome face, obviously very happy. Then it must be a beautiful baby. Rong Yu couldn't bear to tell her that her son was not beautiful at all. After all, she gave birth to him with great effort. Nan 11 said softly, I want to sleep. Rong Yu was startled, his eyes fell on her dry and peeling lips, his heart twisted, and he whispered, drink some water before going to sleep. Nan 11 hummed. Your Majesty. Yin Yu came over and brought a bowl of hot water. This is the ginger sugar water that Miss Jingling just cooked. Drinking it is good for your health. Nan 11 stood up, and Rong Yu quickly reached out to support her and let her lean on his arms. After blowing the ginger sugar water to cool it down a little, Rong Yu tasted it first. It was sweet, with a little ginger and spicy taste, but it tasted okay. He held the bowl and fed it to Nan 11 carefully. Nan 11 was really thirsty and drank the whole bowl of ginger sugar water almost without stopping. Her body was weak after giving birth and it was easy to sweat. After drinking this bowl of ginger sugar water, fine sweat oozes all over her body. There were a few crystals on her white forehead. Yin Yu wiped them with a wrung soft towel and helped Nan 11 lie down again. It was midnight after all this tossing and turning. The palace servants brought the meal and respectfully invited the regent to eat. Rong Yu couldn't eat a bite. Yin Yu brought him a chair, and Rong Yu sat in front of the bed, holding Nan 11's hand tightly. His eyes fell on her fair face, thinking about the look she had just given him, and he couldn't help but have some vague guesses in his heart. Rong Yu Xianyuan 11 came over and said lightly, I'll guard here, you go to eat first. I'm not hungry. Rong Yu turned his head. Mother-in-law, are you going back to the princess's mansion tonight, or staying in the palace? I'll stay in the side hall tonight, and take care of the child with the wet nurse. Xianyuan 11 said, have you chosen a name for the child? Rong Yu nodded. 11er has prepared a few, but I haven't decided yet. Xianyuan 11's expression was subtle. This is your son, don't you have an idea about what name to give the child? Rong Yu really didn't have any idea. 11er decides. Okay. Xianyuan 11 decided to give up communicating with him and said calmly, Yin Yu, your prince hasn't eaten all day, go and get him a bowl of porridge. It's already midnight, it's not suitable to eat too much, eat some light white porridge to fill your stomach. Yin Yu responded and did it. Rong Yu didn't refuse his mother-in-law's kindness. He got up to wash up, ate a bowl of porridge, and continued to watch. Nan 11 didn't sleep for a long time, and she was always dreaming in a daze. The things that flashed in her dreams were all things that happened in her previous life. When she first met Rong Huijin, the stubborn and aloof boy left a deep impression on her. In the future, they were inseparable. He worked in the study, accompanied her in handling government affairs, and listened to her discussing government affairs with her staff. Day after day, it gradually became a habit. The first time he led the army to a battle and returned victorious, he jumped onto the high tower after returning, and knelt in front of her to ask her not to choose a royal husband for the time being. The hot and suppressed emotions between the boy's eyebrows and eyes clearly entered her heart. She accompanied her on the day of her ascension to the throne, accepting the court official's kowtow, and from then on became a loyal and trusted shadow beside her, and the emotions in the boy's eyebrows became stronger. The new emperor ascended the throne and filled the harem. The ministers mentioned this matter in the court every day, but she sent them back because she was busy with government affairs and needed to put the people of the world first. because she had promised him that she would not choose a husband for the time being. Although the word temporarily has no standard at all. In the next few years, the throne was stable, and the boy who was always by the emperor's side grew into a strong and steady young man. As his power and ability became stronger, he gradually became a thorn in the eyes of many people. He never expressed his feelings, but his emotions became more and more uncontrollable. She never gave him a name and a promise. She felt that it was a humiliation to him. He was so aloof, how could he be confined to the harem and be an appendage dependent on a woman? Later, the matter of choosing a husband could no longer be shirked, and she had 4 husbands in her harem. On the day of choosing a husband, he was particularly silent. He was distracted frequently during the discussion in the imperial study, and his eyes and eyebrows always revealed a distressing loneliness. Later, things gradually developed in an uncontrollable direction. The imperial husbands represented the power of their respective families. Since they entered the palace, they naturally needed to share the power of politics from the empress. Whether they were willing or not, they needed to compete for favor like the concubines and get the opportunity to sleep with the empress. They needed a true husband-wife relationship and urgently wanted the empress to give birth to a child with their bloodline. However, this seemingly self-evident thing had a huge obstacle. Regent, the powerful minister who followed the empress closely, made their plans fail again and again. This person became the common enemy of all families and imperial husbands. They dealt with him at all costs, wanted to reduce his power, frame him, and they wanted to get rid of him again and again so that the empress would have the opportunity to favor the imperial husband. In order to make the plan more comprehensive, they even drugged her. I still remember when he broke through the siege and rushed over at the critical moment, his cold and crazy look, like a Shura from hell. He killed people in the palace without scruples, and the guards who blocked the road fell under his sword one after another. Finally, under the angry eyes of the emperor, he unscrupulously took away Dan Shu, who was drugged and unconscious. It was that time that they broke the taboo and indulged in the lust brought by the drug. The next day, the impeachment memorials piled up like a mountain, and the court officials shouted fiercely at his presumption. Her Majesty's cold words quickly extinguished the anger of the officials. Who was the person who plotted against me yesterday? I haven't checked it yet. Do you want me to send someone to investigate it thoroughly? The ministers were speechless. It was one thing for the emperor's husbands to sleep with him, but drugging Her Majesty was enough to be regarded as murdering the monarch. If it was serious, it would not be too much to kill all 9 clans. A storm ended with each side giving in. 2 months later, she was pregnant. I still remember his joyful expression at that time, which dispelled the gloomy color that had lingered between his eyebrows for a long time. Huijin Danshu leaned on the couch, and her calm and cold face rarely showed a soft color. I will make you the regent. You have a unique identity, and you don't need to compete with anyone for favor. You hold power above all other emperors. This is the greatest compensation I can give you. Since she couldn't give him a unique status, she gave him a unique power and identity. Author's words. I planned to write a short story about the story of the previous life in the extra chapter, but later changed my mind. I thought it might be more natural to write it briefly. In fact, I don't quite understand why some people always get entangled in the matter of substitutes. This is originally a setting of past and present lives. The previous life is the cause, and this life is the result. The previous life was unrequited love, so there was the obsession later. From beginning to end, they were still the same 2 people as before, and they never changed in the middle. Just like the setting of rebirth, the heroine's temperament is different before and after rebirth. Is it a substitute? In simple terms, Rong-yu likes that person from beginning to end, no matter what she becomes. As for Nan 11 being the queen, this is what they owed as kings in their previous lives. Putting aside the feelings, it is also a responsibility to compensate the people, but wrong, you took this responsibility alone. Nan 11 just needs to live a peaceful and comfortable life. What is there to worry about? Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will deal with it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding.